The first slave owner was a black man. This was a Twitter post that I found just saying that reparations have already been paid by the 360,000 soldiers who died fighting to end slavery. Anybody fighting to end it is a good thing, but the fact that it was an institution and a culture kind of negates that was destructive in the first place. If something destructive wasn't created in the first place, it wouldn't have had to. If we'd have just not tried to put our foots on the necks of those who otherwise were peaceful beings. The first slave owner was a black man. Again, is another deflection tactic just used to negate the whole thing. See, black people were responsible for slavery. They sold people into slavery and everything else, which we know actually it was a culture. According to the historical records, based on the data, the first Africans to be brought to the Americas as enslaved people arrived in Virginia in 1619. I do want to say with that, there's evidence we were already here. It is well documented that these individuals were purchased by English colonists and forced into servitude. Okay, so therefore it is doubtful that a black man could have been the first enslaver, given the European powers controlled the transatlantic slave trade for several centuries. Here's a letter here just from virtual Jamestown in 1619, talking about the greatness that was colonialism and how they could make more money with tobacco and farms and things of that nature. So this is from the Secretary of Virginia, Sir Dudley Carleton. I got this from a primary source, and I'll leave that link. Anthony Johnson was supposedly the first slave, and of course, this source from PBS is saying that he arrived in Virginia in 1621, and of course, this letter was in 1619. The institution was there already. Okay, it was already a system established. It wasn't like Anthony Johnson landed there and the system wasn't in place. Argument number 2, based on historical fact, the institution of slavery existed long before the arrival of Europeans in Africa. However, the nature of African slavery was quite different from the chattel slavery that developed in the Americas. In most African societies, enslaved people were considered family members and had a certain rights and protections. Therefore, it is inaccurate to equate African slavery with the type of slavery that developed in the New World. So, argument 3, the claim that the first enslaver was a black man is not supported by any credible historical or literary sources. Most reputable scholars agree that the transatlantic slave trade was an overwhelmingly European enterprise, that most enslavers in the Americas were white. To suggest otherwise is to ignore the overwhelming body of evidence that historians and other experts in the field have amassed. Furthermore, the portrayal of the transatlantic slave trade as a primarily European venture is substantiated by extensive archival records and eyewitness accounts. These sources consistently highlight the involvement of European traders and colonial powers in the systematic capture, transport, and enslavement of black people. And again, okay, so even if the first black man, even if that was the case, that he was the first enslaver, how does that negate what happened and the millions of people affected by it and the Reconstruction era and leading all the way up to 1968? And how does that negate the fact that it happened? Okay, it happened. Call a spade, move on. Argument number 8, California was not a slave state. Okay, so again, according to a report by the National Equity Atlas, black residents of California experienced disproportionately high rates of poverty, unemployment, and incarceration compared to their white counterparts. This indicates ongoing disparities in access to resources and opportunities historically rooted in slavery and racism. The next counter argument, which is based on historical fact, while it is true that California was not a slave state, that doesn't mean that California didn't own slaves. Enacted as a part of the Compromise of 1850, the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 was a law passed by Congress on September 18, 1850. This act mandated the return of enslaved people to their owners, even if they had escaped to a free state. Additionally, it placed the responsibility on the federal government to locate, return, and prosecute enslaved people that ran away. So although California was not a slave state, it played a significant role in perpetrating slavery in the United States. During the 19th century, California played a vital role in the transcontinental slave trade, serving as a hub for the trafficking of enslaved people from the American South to the other parts of the country. This history underscores the fact that slavery was not just a regional issue, but a national one that impacted the lives of black people across the country. So based on a scholarly source, a growing body of scholarly research supports the idea that reparations are needed to address the ongoing impacts of slavery and systemic racism. For example, a recent report, and that's the thing to keep in mind is the word impact, right? That hasn't, and most people go through that type of trauma or any type of traumatic event. I'm telling you from experience, you need some therapy to get, over that trauma, right? And to make sure that you're stable, after near-death experiences. So, for example, if you go through centuries of mental trauma where breaking up families was a culture, just like it is now, to where people get benefits from breaking up families. Okay, there's people who try to use it as a finesse game and come up off of people trying to finesse their way into money. Destroying families was a culture. For example, a recent report by the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine found systemic racism and discrimination have prevented many black Americans from achieving social and economic success and accumulating wealth. And reparations could help address these ongoing disparities. One thing you want to note is that back then, the key point I want people who have doubts about reparations to remember is that back then the dollar could purchase much more, as we know, maybe 24 to 1, maybe even 40 to 1, just based upon the color of your skin. That might have determined whether you got deals or not. And so being able to accumulate that much wealth back then, that era was a major stepping stone for black people that missed out on opportunities. And so this suggests that when you miss out on those types of opportunities, that can negatively affect your outcomes. Now we're in the era where, you got different, you got baby boomers that say that millennials and Gen Zs are lazy, and it's that whole concept of people being lazy, when the reality is a lot of people just discouraged. They don't really see no future. Some people, some youth just get frustrated and they're ready to give up. It's hard to blame the youth when you have all these systematic things that have been done, with the big thing being done, the dollar being taken off gold standard in 1971. So even if California was not a slave state, the broader legacy of slavery and racism has had a long-lasting impact on black people across the country. Reparations are needed to address these harms. The argument number 9, black people are no longer affected by slavery. Everything's normal. Everything's normal. Data shows that black people have disproportionately been affected by slavery, discrimination, systemic racism, which has resulted in a significant economic and social disadvantages. According to the National Bureau of Economic Research report, black Americans have suffered persistent income gaps, resulting in a loss of $10 to $20 in the trillions in wealth. Reparations could help to address this wealth gap and provide a measure of justice for past injustices. Okay, and I talked about the purchasing power of the dollar, and how, again, that period was devastating, for us to lose anything, And so what the system did was, a lot of times when there were lynchings, of course, there were of people who had prominent wealth and resources. And that, again, it was a devastating time. We're talking about the time period, let's just say 1971, when the dollar was taken off the gold standard. That period and backwards was a time of great wealth accumulation. Okay, and you had hope back. You had a hope of a bright future. The chart below is sourced from Harvard article in 2021. The massive wealth gap does not show overall wealth progress as a nation, and if we are to empower the future of America, the debt owed must be addressed. Okay, and this is just a disparity comparison I kind of made. The red line representing black and Latinos, and of course white is represented in this purple color. So counter argument 2, the historical facts show that black people have been subjected to centuries of exploitation and oppression, beginning with the transatlantic slave trade and continuing through the Jim Crow segregation era and modern day systemic racism. You can also see, you can just Google 100 massacres after Reconstruction. These injustices have resulted in intergenerational trauma, economic disadvantage. Reparations have been provided to address historical inequities such as payments to Japanese Americans who were interned during World War II and reparations to Holocaust survivors. A scholarly source such as the book From Here to Equality by William Darity and Kristen Mullen argues that reparations are necessary to address the ongoing effects of slavery and systemic racism. Authors say reparations are compensating for past wrongs and addressing continuing discrimination and inequality. They propose a plan for reparations that includes direct payments, investments in education, in housing, and community development projects. The program is based on extensive research and analysis, provides a framework for implementing reparations fairly and effectively. Of course, this is the 13th Amendment clause. Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction. So this kind of kept the slavery going. In this great video, she covers the 13th Amendment. She does an excellent job. So the next video, we'll go over the slave owners were paid reparations.